very interesting topics, and I'll get things going here pretty soon. I think Lisa's first up. She might be having a little issues with her computer. I'd like to remind the presenters that we have, or everyone has 20 minutes to present and respond to questions. 15 minutes, sorry. The questions session will take place in the chat window. So when you're done presenting, you could read the question before you respond. Great. All right. Looks like Lisa's screen is sharing. That's good.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Great. Okay. I'm ready whenever you are.
It's your game, so take it when you're ready.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Delger, and my advisor was Dr. Dow. Tonight I'll be discussing How Far to Freedom, a spatial analysis of human trafficking and service providers. Prior to entering this program, I was an advocate for the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Though there were times when a survivor would call and be in an area with adequate services, more often than not, the survivor would call in the middle of the night on a Friday and Saturday with nowhere to go and no resources. To make matters worse, often there was no human trafficking service provider within 100 miles of the signal to even call. Advocates had to then creatively find alternative programs who might be able to assist the survivor based on the specific situation, or ultimately will left a safety plan with the survivor to stay in the situation. This study initially started out to open a space for service providers to visualize where survivors are and where those gaps in services were across the United States. However, I'll explain later how that plan was modified. So first, the background on human trafficking. The U.S. federal definition of human trafficking includes the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel someone to work or engage in commercial sex against their will. Examples include, but are not limited to, things such as emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, extortion or threats against the survivor or their family, or could be based on cultural stigmas. Individual states also have the ability to pass human trafficking legislation. However, only 20 states have such legislation, leaving 24 states without the ability to directly charge traffickers with human trafficking offenses. Based on a literature review and previous experience, I chose to combine that and focus on the proximity to human trafficking specific service providers. Human trafficking cases are highly complicated cases requiring a range of services, often that change with time. Many of these survivors in emergency situations are without financial freedom, have been removed or isolated from their family and social networks, and may have mistrust for the local law enforcement. Additionally, many service providers focus on the immediate needs such as shelter, but they cannot provide things such as fuel cards to get to the shelter. Due to the diversity of situations of human trafficking, it would also be nearly impossible for a single organization to be able to meet the needs of every survivor on their own. Thus, oftentimes, the primary human trafficking organization may focus on providing those physical and safety needs of the survivor, but network with other organizations to provide things such as legal assistance and mental health. One study found in their research that the most important resource for survivors after emergency services is long and short-term mental health resources. Another study found that if survivors did not receive mental health resources to cope with the trauma associated with the trafficking, the survivor has a significantly higher chance of being re-victimized in the future. Human trafficking has been extensively researched. This study focused on traditional crime studies, human trafficking specific service provider research, and spatial analysis comparing the proximity of human trafficking and resources. Traditional human trafficking crime data focused on where is human trafficking occurring, What is the demographic information in that area? And what is route analysis to identify key trafficking patterns across the world? This includes how does human trafficking, how close does it occur to things such as hotel, motels, high crime areas, truck stops, etc.? What is the social ethnic breakdown of survivors? If an individual originates in another state or country, how is that individual transported to the new trafficked location? Human trafficking specific service provider research focuses on the specific needs of survivors after leaving the traffic situation. Often this research argued, due to the complexity of the cases, it is not enough to simply have human trafficking survivors depend on organizations dedicated to such traumatic events such as interpersonal violence or sexual assaults. Several studies highlighted that human trafficking survivors need differences include the fact that many trafficking survivors may have children with them that also need assistance and protection from the trafficker. Due to some restrictions on dependents with interpersonal violence organizations, for example, survivors with male dependents may not be able to utilize those shelters. Also, survivors have needs from several organizations such as mental health, legal, and transitional housing. However, organizations focused on interpersonal violence or sexual assault have their own specific resources focused on meeting the needs of their targeted population. They may not have the resources or knowledge on how to connect a human trafficking survivor to those additional services. Another primary concern cited in the research focused on security elements and safety concerns for the non-human trafficking specific service providers. Often they were not able to provide the adequate safety concerns to protect those individuals involved. Lastly, research addressed how mission statements can restrict an organization from assisting a trafficking survivor unless that situation had some nexus to the organization's mission statement. This was particularly prevalent in interpersonal violence shelters, where they could only assist if the trafficker was either a significant other or a family member to the victim. The last thread of research focused on previous spatial analysis, looking at the proximity of human trafficking and services. Similar research had been conducted in South Dakota, and it looked at the number of services offered to rural Native American women and girls. The research highlighted the lack of education within the general community, and this was particularly important as the local community had several stigmas toward human trafficking survivors, and this impacted their ability to re-enter the community and contributed to future vulnerabilities. Another study was from the UK and found that the amount of money spent on combating human trafficking often did not correlate with the areas with the highest cases of trafficking. The primary goal of this study was to demonstrate how GIS could be used to identify those gaps in services and open a space for service providers, law enforcement, survivors, and lawmakers to discuss how to creatively address those gaps in services. So one of the big challenges to this project was identifying a nationwide human trafficking data source. The main source cited in previous research was derived from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, ran by the Polaris Project. The map on the right is a heat map where trafficking is reported by that hotline. This reflects all calls received by the hotline in 2019, regardless of the signal's motive for calling. Additionally, this information was only released in the form of a heat map. There are no spreadsheets or additional breakouts of the information for analysis. Lastly, Polaris Project does not release any of their GIS layers for the general public to analyze. The map on the left depicts the location of the service providers listed in the Polaris Project referral directory. These organizations partner with the hotline and give consent if the hotline receives a call in that area that they can be connected with a service provider. The map depicts all human trafficking organizations, those who have a human trafficking program or an interpersonal violence provider who is willing to assist the trafficker if the specific criteria is matched. These services range from legal assistance, mental health, long-term resources, and emergency needs. However, for this project, I expanded that search to include organizations listed with 211, organizations found through various grant and online searches. Additionally, only service providers that provided emergency needs or multiple services for human trafficking survivors were included. Another national level data source I attempted to use was the FBI's Uniform Crime Program data. This data is compiled from local law enforcement voluntarily reporting the human trafficking cases to the FBI. I used a crosswalk to match the reporting agencies with the central coordinates from the jurisdiction to map the data. As shown on the map, there is no consistency in reporting. There are 7 states where no law enforcement agencies reported any human trafficking cases. The icons vary in size and color based on the total number of human trafficking cases reported in 2019 by law enforcement agencies. However, as you can see, several dots are slightly overlapping and accurately reflect the overlapping jurisdiction, while other areas include large swaths of the United States that did not report anything. Thus, I had to modify my initial proposal and focused on Los Angeles, California for this study due to the level of detail published with the human trafficking and complementary infrastructure data available through the Open Data GIS hub. After finalizing the scope for the study, I collected the required data sources from Open Data and geocoded the service provider list I compiled. To identify any potential bias in the data, I looked at various data points, including looking at the age breakdown and description of location of the crime. I then used ArcPro's kernel density tool to find the statistical significant hotspots for the overall data set and then by age. Finally, I used the centroids of the hotspots to calculate the distance required to travel to each of the applicable service providers. I used Google Maps for this task to be able to predict the amount of time required to travel these distances based on the conditions at 10 p.m. on a random Thursday night. To compile this, I used the list of assumptions. As highlighted in nearly all of the literature reviewed, due to the nature of human trafficking, it has to be assumed that the numbers are significantly underreported. Additionally, it is unknown how many of the cases reported in this data set involved repeat survivors. This study assumed that each report involved a unique survivor. Lastly, it is important to acknowledge that the shelter location reported is not accurate due to safety concerns. However, I assume that this shelter would be in the general vicinity of the reported location. As previously stated, prior to mapping the data, I broke it down by age and location. The overall breakdown of age was reflected on the left. I found that 72% of the cases involved minors. This is further broken down on the right. Initially, I found a significant amount of the cases were reported as with a location description of on the street. After mapping, I manually reviewed a sample of the coordinates reported with similar location descriptions to identify if any of the dots may have created an artificial cluster based on the automated association between cross streets and specific coordinates. As there was variation in the coordinates, I assumed the location was accurate based on additional information that was not available to the public. On the left is the description and breakdown of all the service providers used in this study, and they are mapped on the right. This study only utilized organizations that were identified through the Polaris Project Referral Directory, 211 as being having human trafficking programs, or through internet searches, grants, or that was self-reported through their organization. On the left is the initial kernel clusters from all 571 data points reported in Los Angeles between 2015 and 2019. As you can see, there are 2 primary hotspots, one in the southern part of LA, and additionally a hotspot in the north, near North Hills neighborhood. These 2 hotspots remained consistent through all of the analysis. On the right, I focused on hotspot A. Here I overlaid the point data over the kernel density data to have a better understanding of how the cases were mapped. Most of these cases were reported along two main strips just off the highways. Minors are identified as the pink circles or green circles with black spots. The survivors who are identified as 18 years old were the black circles, and triangles and plus signs were those individuals over the age of 18. Next, they used the kernel density tool to identify clusters based on age. On the left, the kernel clusters for survivors under 18 years old. Here, additional 2 hotspots were identified near the center of the city. However, there was also high-density areas along major transportation corridors. On the right, 2 additional clusters were identified for individuals 18 years and older. However, the density of this data was significantly less due to the sample size. Lastly, I identified the centroid of the hotspots and found the closest cross street. I then used Google Maps to calculate the most direct route from the cross street to each of the service providers. On the chart, areas identified in red were excluded as that pair of hotspot and service provider were not able to assist that targeted population. Areas highlighted in green were organization where the survivor could travel the fastest regardless of the mode of transportation, and the orange cells identified a contingency option. Areas highlighted in blue represented an organization where the survivor could travel within an estimated hour walk. This was particularly important as most survivors did not have access to a car or car riding service. Hotspot A was the only cluster that did not have a service provider within an assessed hour walk. Here's an example of where service providers could contribute to this discussion. Based on their on-the-ground experience and case management data, potentially they could help explain why this gap exists. Additionally, if service providers found that their clients are not associated with Hotspot A, then are there transportation challenges to reach that population? Would a community outreach program be helpful? Or what is going on in that area that is preventing human trafficking survivors to make it to service providers? And here's a list of a summary of the resources used for this study, and additional resources are always available. Are there any questions or concerns?
Okay, thanks, Lisa. That was a great presentation. If anyone has questions, we have a question right now. So Lisa, if you can look on the chat.
Okay. The question is, human trafficking involves exploiting a person for labor, services, or commercial sex. In your experience, what is the breakdown of victims between labor and commercial sex? Human trafficking involves exploiting a person of labor, services, or commercial sex. In your experience, I think the question was actually posted twice. The problem with all human trafficking data is that there's really no consistency in reporting. When we're comparing things such as labor and commercial sex, depending on the situation, commercial sex is a form of labor. People who are, say, in a domestic servitude role may also be exploited for commercial sex, either through video chats or other services. So it really becomes a complicated situation. I think that we have more reports of commercial sex than of forced labor. I think that's for a number of reasons. One, commercial sex is more visible. It's also often associated with prostitution, so we get more reports, at least that was my experience at the hotline, where forced labor, people often confuse with human smuggling. And it's also a lot of times out of the public. Out here in Washington, D.C., domestic servitude is also a problem. And we just don't see that. And without someone reporting it, we don't have that data to drive from. Another question is, what would you recommend for a follow-up study here? If another person wanted to tackle this topic in the future of capstone, what problems would you suggest they target? I would strongly recommend getting the approval to do interviews with service providers and do a local study and try to see if they would be willing to release any of their data. It came too late in my capstone where I wasn't comfortable adding another facet to it, but I think it would be very interesting if we could look at the number of survivors that are being helped in each one of these areas, and if they're willing to share with the analyst where that trafficking occurred and how they traveled, and where did they end up? Were they relocated out of the area? So, any other questions?
I think we've wrapped that up. So really appreciate your presentation, Lisa, and great job.
Thank you.
So next up we have Jesse Smucker. So if you want to try to share your screen.
Yep, sure. Great job, Lisa. I'm going to share my PowerPoints. Okay, can everyone see that?
We can now, and we can hear you.
Great. Thank you all for joining this evening. The title of my project is Characterizing Historical Patterns of Forest Land Ownership and Parcelization in McKean County, Pennsylvania. My advisor is Dr. Erica Smithwick. My project focus is on uncovering and characterizing post-colonial timber ownership in the hemlock hardwood forest region of Pennsylvania, using McKean County, Pennsylvania as a study site. I particularly focus on the recent rise of timber investment management organizations and how these companies fit into a historical context. The map on the screen shows the location of McKean County. You see the beloved Center County right here, Pittsburgh is down here, and Erie is up here. Who owns the United States and why? The best way to answer this question is to look at history. History informs why things are the way they are in the present day. When we think about present land ownership history anywhere in the United States, we have to look at the foundation that shaped our current system. The modern United States cadastral system, or system of recording property rights, is rooted in 16th and 17th century post-colonial land claims. To this day, land is considered by the US government to be a resource that can be bought and sold by individuals, organizations, and government entities. The Land Ordinance of 1785 is a good example of how the US government formed a system to control how land was surveyed, how it could be acquired, and whom could acquire it. Dividing land into uniform and congruent shapes was a convenient way for the government to track and maintain record of ownership, and for wealthy European men and their associated organizations to claim wide swaths of the US as their own. Original post-colonial surveys in Pennsylvania reflected this trend of rectangular, uniform, and congruent land ownership boundaries. William Penn, along with other powerful white colonialists, had an interest in quickly and efficiently colonizing as much land as possible in Pennsylvania, and therefore was a fan of right angles and continuity when it comes to ownership. This structure allowed for quick and easy purchases of land without ever having to step foot onto it. Land ownership history is wrapped up in power and competing interests of different organizations and individuals. Companies interested in extracting resources from the land, conservation organizations that want to preserve those resources, individuals and companies that want to acquire land as an investment, and government agencies that want to preserve land for present and future generations, all acquire and convey land based on their interests. It is important for these individuals and agencies to understand the past and present state of land ownership so they can be strategic when considering what land interests to acquire and convey. Of particular interest in the McKean region is understanding the somewhat elusive timber investment management organizations, or TIMOs, who have recently acquired large tracts of land in this region. These organizations began to emerge as it became advantageous to acquire timberland to diversify their investment portfolios. There's much less local knowledge of these organizations in the region because they are less open with sharing information publicly. Often they are nested within a hierarchy of other company ownerships, and they do not own every piece of the timbering process like previous industrial owners. TIMOs manage land on behalf of investors. Although they are different from their industrial counterparts, they are similar in that the end goal is to make a profit off of land. Therefore, I'm attempting to uncover how these TIMOs fit into the broader ownership context with these two research questions. First, are there common ownership and parcelization type histories specific to the parcels currently owned or managed by TIMOs? And second, how do the ownership and parcelization histories of land currently managed by TIMOs relate to broader ownership and parcelization trends? Here's the breakdown of ownership in McKean. So on the west side, you have the Allegheny National Forest in green, and this orange here is state game land, and the rest is a mix of both private and public ownership. Quick history of McKean County. McKean is part of the Allegheny Plateau ecoregion, which consists of a hemlock hardwood forest. Land ownership has changed in McKean County over the past century with the boom and bust cycle of major oil and timber industries. Prior to colonialization, the Native American Iroquois lived in northern Pennsylvania. In 1784, the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, also known as the Last Purchase, was finalized, and colonists forced the Iroquois to leave the region. This history is much more complex than I'm getting into now, but it's important to point out. McKean was then formed in 1804, and the harvest of white pine began to meet the demand of industry. Near the 1800s, hemlock bark was extracted for tanneries, as you can see in this image. The Hammermill Paper Company dominated the timber industry in the mid-1900s. They created pulp from hardwood trees. The oil industry was also dominant with boom and bust cycles throughout the 1800s and again in the 1900s. After the 1990s, there was a shift from these traditional industries to the TIMOs. For this study, it's important to understand what parcelization is. A parcel represents the extent to which an individual or agency owns real estate, and parcelization can be defined as an increase in subdivision of parcels over time. So you have one parcel in year one, and then it's subdivided in year two. I acquired JPEG maps from McKean County and Rockford Publishing for this project from 1934, 56, 78, 86, 97, 2007, and 2019. Each map year had varying levels of information. As you can see here, 1934 had boundary information as well as surface and subsurface ownership. The 1956 data had boundary information but no ownership information. 1978 had ownership and boundary information, but in the case where ownership was congruent, the boundaries were missing. And same with the 86 maps. The 97 maps were similar to this 1956 map. And the 2007 and 2019 data were both vector layers. Here are my methods. So first was identifying the owners. I queried all parcels above 10 acres and not in boroughs and cities. I then used the summary statistics tool to identify top owners. I coded ownership into 3 categories: TIMOs, federal and state ownership. And I then added 2 additional key owners, the Collins Pine Company and Seneca Resources. Next was georeferencing the maps. So I georeferenced all maps working backwards through time, assuming the 2019 parcels were the most precise and accurate, using the parcel boundaries, township, county, and warrant boundaries as reference. I made sure to add at least 5 control points per map. Next was feature class creation. I created 6 vector polygon feature classes for each map year. Then I added ownership, ownership type, acreage, perimeter, edge over area, and comment fields to each. I appended the 2019 parcel layer to each of the blank feature classes. Next was the feature class adjustment. So working backwards through time, I adjusted the feature classes to reflect each map year. I then used the vector editing tools to add vertices, split features, and create new features where needed. I ensured that snapping was on to prevent overlap. Next was entering in the ownerships. So owners were entered for each map year based on the owner indicated in the surveys. If ownership was not indicated in the surveys, the 2019 attributes along with online deed sources were used to fill in the gaps. And in a case where I couldn't find the information, I just left it blank.
You're going in, right?
Next was connecting parcels back through time. So I used the concept of parent and child parcels from Donnelly and Evans 2006, but instead of working forwards through time, I worked backwards through time to show consolidation instead of parcelization. Spatial selection was used to find all parcels whose center was in or identical to the 2019 parcels, and manual adjustment was done to select parcels missed by the spatial selection. Next was parcel area changes. So parcel acreage size was added and graphed in a normal distribution graph in Excel. Parcel perimeter in meters and area in square meters was calculated for each map. And this was also added to a normal distribution graph in Excel. Finally, the ownership histories. Bar charts were created for each map year in Pro using the sum of acreages grouped by ownership. The spatial join tool was used to combine all map years into one. Python was used to fill all ownership transfers from one owner to the next. And all ownership transfers and their acreage amounts were added to Excel. And the top ownership transfers were added to a bar chart. So here's the first result. This is showing edge over area in a normal distribution graph. So the 1934 parcels tended to be smaller and less complex. That's showing in green. And the 2019 parcels tended to be larger and more complex, showing in blue. Parcel size increased over time for all ownership types. So you can see the different ownership types in the different colors there on the slide. The Seneca Resources parcels shown in the dark blue were the smallest in both 1934 and 2019. The federally owned parcels shown in this orangey color changed the least, and the TIMO parcels changed the most. That's shown in the green. So a good example, I can get my mouse over here, is in this 1934 map. This parcel right here is a TIMO parcel, and it was consolidated right there in the 2019 map. So the focus of the study was the TIMOs. The TIMO parcels changed dramatically from 1934 to 2019, and there was a wider distribution of values in 2019. Top owners in 1934 included the Armstrong Forest Company, Heinemann Chemical, South Penn Oil, and Menard Run Oil. Top owners in 1986 included the Hammermill Paper Company and Texas Gulf and Sulfur. And then by 2007, most of it was owned by TIMOs. This is showing state ownership. We'll keep moving because I'm running out of time. The federal ownership changed the least, as you can see, and most of it was already owned by the US in 1934. The Collins Pine Company also moderately changed, and most of it was acquired by 1986. Interesting to note that there's a variety of different owners, including individuals, in 1934. Seneca Resources, these parcels were almost all owned by oil and gas companies throughout the time periods, and they tended to be the smallest parcels with some consolidation occurring. Here are some top ownership exchanges. So the way I found these also included owners that owned land from 1934 all the way up to 2019 with no ownership exchange. So that's why you're seeing this United States here owning over 100,000 acres the whole time between 1934 and 2019. The next highest was this Armstrong Forest to Texas Gulf exchange, which are two big industrial owners. And then the next was Hammermill Paper Company to International Paper, which are also two industrial owners. There are a variety of other ownership transfers, including TIMOs to government agencies, TIMOs to TIMOs, And this one here, this is just state ownership held from 1934 to 2019. So in conclusion, the focus of the study was to characterize TIMO acquisitions in the context of broader ownership trends using the study site, McKean County, Pennsylvania. Consolidation occurred across the study site amongst all ownership types between 1934 and 2019, and parcel shape became more complex. The 2019 TIMO parcels showed the highest change in parcel size between 1934 and 2019, and the federally owned parcels showed the least amount of change in area. Each ownership type had different ownership histories. The TIMO parcels tended to have industrial owners. The federal parcels, most of this was already acquired by the US by 1934. The state parcels, some was acquired by 1934, and the rest was acquired from TIMOs and industrial owners. The Seneca Resources parcels used to be owned by a lot of different oil and gas companies. The Collins Pine Company parcels, some was owned by 1934, and the rest was acquired from a mix of individuals and industrial owners. There also were these significant ownership exchanges that I just talked about. So manually georeferencing and creating vector data for a whole county level was very time consuming. So for future studies, I would advise developing an automated way to do this or selecting a smaller set. It would also be interesting to add in older surveys such as post-Revolutionary War allotments to round out this history. Similarities in boundaries shared an impact of original survey on overall distribution and characteristics of current day parcels would be interesting to see. Additionally, adding in other neighboring county data would allow for county comparison, and adding other ownership histories such as municipalities, other industrial owners would round out this history. I want to thank all these wonderful people, especially my advisor, Dr. Erica Smithwick, Kayla Bancone, McKean County, the Leafs Lab, Dr. Derek Holdsworth, Western Pennsylvania Conservancy colleagues, especially Matt Maruziak, Penn State GIS community, and my family and friends. Here are all of my references and any questions.
All right, thank you, Jesse, for that interesting presentation. Looks like you've got a question already.
PA is somewhat notorious for inaccurate political and parcel boundaries. Did you experience this problem with your work in McKean County? Yes, so a good example of that was there was a major upgrade between 2000. So the question was, did you, Pennsylvania is somewhat notorious for inaccurate political and parcel boundaries. Did you experience this problem with your work in McKean County? A good example of that was there was a big upgrade between 2007 and 2019. So luckily the 2019 data was pretty accurate and precise. So that was a good reference for me to look at when comparing all the other maps. But yes, the 2007 data, there was quite a big shift from the 2007 data to the 2019 data. But a way that I kind of got around that was comparing across time. So like if a parcel looked kind of weird in one map year, I could compare it to the previous map year and see if in fact that's how it was, or if it was a data inaccuracy. Okay, another question. I'm curious if you had a chance to also look at how companies themselves were acquired or consolidated over time, and how those changes in corporate ownership contributed to changes in property ownership you discussed. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, especially like the oil and gas industries. A lot of those kind of dissolved into one ownership. I didn't get into that, but that would be an interesting thing for further research to see what companies did dissolve, and some industrial companies, completely dissolved. Others were bought by larger companies. So that would be interesting and an additional research. Let's see. In my home state, it is uncommon for municipal parcel maps to show large lots, which one reads the deeds are in fact made up of multiple tracts. Splitting off and selling a tract does not require subdivisions. Have the deeds for these lots also been rewritten? Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Some of the deeds, I'd have to actually purchase the deed to see that. Some of them I did acquire for just like out of curiosity, and they do mention lots. So for some of the larger parcels, it mentions all of the different lots that were consolidated into one parcel. Why did you select McKean County and TMOS for your study? That's a great question. So I thought McKean County was a great study site that showed both federal, state, and a mix of TMO and industrial ownership, as well as they were free for me to acquire. I went to the county office and they were able to give me all of this great data back to 1934. Is my assumption correct that the TMOs did not obtain ownership of the mineral rights? So in some cases they did, in some cases they didn't, and that's a whole other history that would be interesting to get into. What's the subsurface ownership story? Yeah. So.
All right, Jesse, great job. Thanks again. And,
thank you.
Next up, we have Jacob Horwitz. So Jacob, share your screen. We'll check that out for you.
Okay. Can anyone see my screen?
Not yet.
Wait. Yeah, I'm not sure what's. Oh, there we go.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Yes, we see your screen, so you can start whenever you wish.
Hello, my name is Jacob Horwitz, and my presentation focuses on investigative GIS, using geospatial technologies to track, document, and report markers of chlorine dioxide. First, I will start with the background of my topic, followed by the problem I'll be focusing on. I will state my goals and objectives, the data and tools needed, and the GIS technology needed. I planned on using 3 different scenarios involving the investigation of a business, monitoring eBay users, and geolocating suspects involved in marketing chlorine dioxide. Finally, I will state my results of the project and answer questions afterwards. Social activists have been focusing on spatial topics can use GIS to focus on an area of interest. For example, Nuke Watch, an anti-nuclear activist group, conducted the Missile Silo Project, which mapped over 1,000 states across the US with the help of volunteers for the intention of public discussion on nuclear weapons. One such activist who used GIS in social activism is Rebecca Jones, who used ArcGIS dashboard as shown on the right to inform people of the COVID-19 statistics to her own terms after getting fired from the state of Florida after using to post it on their terms. When I was trying to figure out what to call this project, I considered a lot of different terminology. At first it was neogeography, but that wasn't new anymore, and it started to become volunteer geographic information. I also thought about participatory GIS, but that wasn't a great fit either because it focuses on empowering only a local community. Which now leads to the main problem, which focuses on the marketing of chlorine dioxide for consumption. Although chlorine dioxide is used for industrial purposes, the Genesis II Church of Health and Healing promoted chlorine dioxide as a cure under the term miracle mineral solution. Based on the FDA's investigation, the Genesis II Church makes an average of $32,000 a month. However, when the COVID pandemic began, they made $123,000 in March 2020 alone after stating that MMS can cure COVID. Since 2014, there were 16,000 reported cases of chlorine dioxide poisoning, including one involving an autistic girl who nearly died from liver failure after parents believe can cure autism. This has become a widespread problem as not only the church, but other companies sold chlorine dioxide as a medicine throughout the US and the world. This is where geospatial tools can become beneficial. So my goal in this case is to use GIS technology and geospatial intelligence tools to track, document, and report marketers of MMS. I started this project in 2018 when I began researching the Genesis 2 Church and how they market the product. To keep track of each business, I began logging them into GIS by the company name and their location. By 2019, after trying to get the attention of journalists, I created the website GeoBoros to publish maps and information to expose businesses selling MMS. The name GeoBoros stems from two different words. Geo coming from the Greek word for earth, Boros from the name Ouroboros, which is the symbol of a serpent eating its tail, as you can see on the top. Because of the sensitive issue of this topic, I use the alias Eli Dagan, which comes from two critical individuals in Israel's Operation Outside the Box. Eli comes from Elijah Skadi, former Israeli Air Force commander. Dagan comes from Meir Dagan, the former chief of Mossad. My reason for this comes after my colleague and activist, Fiona O'Leary, has on numerous occasions voiced her opposition against MMS marketing. As a result, she received numerous death threats from MMS marketers because of that. By 2020, I was approached by a federal organization who used and continue to use information from my site. Such information include my observation on Jonathan and Jordan Grennan, the son of Genesis 2 Church's co-founder, Mark Grennan. The information led to Jonathan and Jordan's arrest at their MMS facility in Bradenton, Florida, and they currently await trial in Miami, Florida. And as you'll see on the quote below and an image on the right, users from a Telegram page have been fearful of the GeoBoros website due to the detailed investigation made on the Grennans and other businesses. The data needed will be geospatial data from gathered information. Such information are websites belonging to MMS businesses, including their business filings if applicable. Other sources include eBay and social media websites such as Facebook and MeWe. One other vital source includes the WPS suppliers list, which is a website operated by members of the Genesis 2 Church to advertise businesses selling MMS. Tools needed for this project are the Wayback Machine to archive information in order to prevent the destruction of evidence. Another tool is a spreadsheet such as Microsoft Excel to log in documents and eBay users involved with MMS businesses. Google Maps is a vital mapping tool for remote sensing between aerial imagery and street view. The GIS technology that will be needed is software from Esri. ArcGIS Pro will create and update geospatial data focusing on businesses and eBay users selling MMS, including areas of interest where the business or CEO resides. From ArcGIS Pro, geospatial data is then uploaded into ArcGIS Online, which will act as not only a cloud to store the data, but will also become useful in creating geospatial applications. The main geospatial application to be used is ArcGIS Dashboard, which will act as an informational dashboard to inform journalists, medical experts, and law enforcement on current information regarding businesses and eBay users involved with marketing MMS. So the first scenario is the investigation of a business. Data defined when investigating involves a business registration, define the CEO name and address, and the main website to find contact information such as an email and phone number, including any incriminating information that ties the business to marketing MMS. Social media can also be used to further find other incriminating information tied to that business. Wayback Machine is also used to either archive or uncover previous information that became altered or destroyed in the process. Information is then converted into geospatial data to view the business location and information. So the business I use for this example is Kiwi's Corner, who has had connections with the Genesis 2 church, but later tried covering up their tracks to act as a legitimate business. The business registration reveals the CEO of the company to be Stephen Party, along with his wife, Kathy Party, as the acting manager. Their business is located in Lake Placid, Florida, and through the main website, it is revealed that Kiwi's Corner was a major and trusted supplier to the Genesis 2 church through the use of Wayback Machine. The archived homepage reveals the Genesis 2 church logo as shown on the right corner or right-hand side. Through social media on the MMS forum, Stephen, who went under the name of Steve, as shown on the bottom, gave other people advice in selling chemicals as alternative health. The second scenario is the monitoring of eBay users, which involves analyzing and documenting the eBay users' products and documenting them into an Excel spreadsheet. Information to analyze a product is the name, the price, how many times the item is sold, and the shipping location. In a spreadsheet, a column is made for a total money made for each item by multiplying the price by the times it's sold. At the bottom of the spreadsheet, the total items sold and the total money made are summed together to verify the total amount by each month. Information from the spreadsheet is then converted into geospatial data to view the user's location and total sales by a graduated amount to analyze which user is making the most money. I apply this to one of the eBay users known as Pure Water Solutions. When investigating the user's products, the shipping location is in Silver Hill, Alabama. And upon further analysis, the item price is $24.95 and was bought 134 times. The total amount for this item sold about $3,343.30. After analyzing the other products of this user, the total items altogether reached 2,660 with a total amount of $70,157. My third and last scenario is geolocating the suspects who are part of MMS marketing. Information needed to geolocate suspects are the photos they take through social media websites. And if applicable, apps can also be used to track a suspect's GPS location. Once gathered, the information is analyzed through Google Maps to find key features in the background of the photos. Confirmed areas of interest and GPS locations are digitized into ArcGIS. One such example, as shown on the right, is a static map of Irvine, California, showing the Irvine Towers as a confirmed area of interest, with the Golden State Foods building being a key feature, as revealed in a screenshot of a video. The example used in geolocating is through Mark Grennan and his son Joseph in Santa Marta, Colombia. Facebook and Instagram were used to gather photos from both suspects, including Runtastic, to track Joseph's GPS location. After analyzing the information through Google Maps, one of the areas of interest confirmed is a complex called Cabanas de Gara, as highlighted in red. From the photos taken, key features highlighted in blue are the Edifico Arrecife, Apartment Rodadero, Taurus Universal, and a gate to the complex. GPS location or GPS information from Joseph's Runtastic app, as highlighted in green, shows Cabanas de Gyra as the start and end location of each track. As for the results in the first scenario, there are over 50 businesses recorded globally, with over 30 of them still being active today. The sources used to find these businesses was shared with USA Today to create a map in one of their articles showcasing businesses operated by the Genesis 2 Church and businesses associated with them. The problem with showing the dashboard to the public was some MMS supporters believed that GeoBorrow's website was to facilitate MMS business, which then came to some unanticipated results in which people were repeatedly emailing me, asking me where they could either find MMS businesses or even thought about trying to buy the MMS from me, which I didn't have. In the second scenario, there were over 50 users on eBay, with over 40 of them still being active. The top 3 eBay users were Pure Water Solutions, Outlaw CDS, and BioTrex Direct in that order. One of the eBay users, Oclo 2020, was reported to The Guardian due to the user's association with Komusov, which then prompted eBay to shut the user down. One of the issues with this scenario is evaluating European users, as the currency value between Euro and USD tend to shift over time. In the third scenario, the geolocation of the Grenans was successful, as the organization confirmed the areas of interest to be accurate. You may have been aware of this on the 23rd of April last week, as many news organizations reported the Grenans' indictment with the possibility of life in prison. And with that, are there any questions?
All right, thank you very much, Jacob. That was a great presentation. Looks like you have a question in the chat window.
With the recent successes and arrests, do you think the sales of MMS will start to slow down, or will we be tracking this for the long haul? More than likely, I will be tracking this for the long haul. I've seen some businesses, it seemed like they started opening up in 2020 last year. When I reported that one eBay user, who was actually in the Miami, Florida area, part of me felt like I should have waited a little bit later to report that, because I believe there are a few other businesses that might be in there selling MMS either through eBay or even setting up as a business. But I'm still might need a month, or between 2 weeks to a month or so to verify fully. Thank you, Fiona. Yes, she is actually in the group with us. I really had no prior knowledge about MMS, so I learned something new to your topic. What sort of geospatial tools do you wish you had a hand to do with the sort of investigative work? Were existing tools enough? One of the things I would like to try and do, but I don't know how it would be possible, is using Python to some sort of scripting tool, to easily look through all the update eBay pages, to keep making checks and updates to, how many items were sold through each user or each product. And sometimes the price of the product, they might change over time or might fluctuate when converting the euro to USD. So that kind of screws up just a slight bit, but not by much. Oh, do you want to ask a question, Fiona? I think she's gonna try and type it. Anyone still here?
We're still here. I think, there we go.
There we go.
From what I've been hearing, there might be a possibility that the Grants will take a plea deal, and that could change a lot. Because if they take that plea deal, they may, in exchange, for a reduced sentence. Because I don't know about Mark Brennan, but the sons, have a lot, to lose, especially two of them, have wives with children that were being born, as they were still incarcerated too. So they could more than likely, give up information of who else is connected. And with Fiona asking if anyone who may most likely be arrested, I like to place my bets on Stephen Party. And that is because he's just not only in the Florida area, but he also had, some close ties to Mark Brennan. He helped him set up that water precaution suppliers page with a whole bunch of businesses, getting themselves advertised on there as long as they paid like a 10% amount based on the, sales in chlorine dioxide that they sell, or selling them as, kits, as called MMS.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jacob. That was great.
Thank you.
Next up on our list of presenters, we have Oleskander Stefanik.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Okay, that's good. And we can see your presentation. So whenever you're ready.
Excellent. Hello, my name is Oleksandr Stefankev. Thank you for joining my presentation. Today I'd like to tell you about my project utilizing remote sensing for pocket estuary mapping within Puget Sound. And my advisor is Jarlath O'Neill Dunn. So here's just a short outline, what I'd like to tell you about. I'll tell you about background of my project goals and objectives, share my methodology, results and conclusions. So I work as a research ecologist focusing mainly on salmon habitat in Puget Sound, which is a basin that is located in Pacific Northwest of the United States. It contains 16 large river systems and associated large river deltas, as well as multiple small-scale pocket estuaries and independent streams, as you can see on the map here in yellow, and the large river estuaries are in red. If you're unfamiliar with Pacific salmon, but I'm sure you tasted it at some point, these species are quintessential to Puget Sound. They provide major cultural, recreational, and economic value to the region, and several of the species have been listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. So salmon has very interesting life cycle. They spend most of their time in the ocean, and when they reach reproductive age, they migrate up the streams to the freshwater sections of the river, where they spawn and deposit eggs and die off. And then the eggs, once they hatch and grow into fry, they migrate downstream, where they congregate in the large river estuary in the green here. And this stage is really important because in this stage, they transition from freshwater to saltwater. So there are a lot of physiological changes that take place. And then once they are ready, they make their way to the ocean. So as you can see, these large river estuaries are vital for endangered salmon. However, because majority of large river estuaries have been degraded from agriculture and urbanization, pocket estuaries, which are located in the near shore, you can see here in kind of this green area, they serve as essentially a replacement and extension to the large river estuaries. So the pocket estuaries are then utilized by juvenile salmon transitionally during their migration from freshwater to saltwater. And pocket estuaries are, where you can see some examples on the right here, are partially enclosed nearshore subestuary with depressed salinity for parts of the year. They usually form behind coastal accretion landforms or small creek mouths. There's some example here that they're formed behind a barrier beach. And usually they're characterized as tidal lagoons that contain fringing unvegetated flats. You can kind of see in the image here, salt marsh, which is kind of this flat vegetated areas, and then tidal channels, which you can kind of see cutting up the salt marsh. And as you can see, they can range in size and complexity and degree of human modification quite a bit. And there are over 500 pocket estuaries in the Puget Sound. So the problem is that everyone recognizes that there's a need for restoration and protection of pocket estuaries. And this need is recognized by all of the local stakeholders that manage salmon habitat. And it is therefore known that it's important to actually assess their habitat in order to see whether the change is occurring from degradation or restoration. But at the Puget Sound scale, there have not been a consistent effort to actually map these habitats. So remote sensing of these estuarine habitats is already a valuable and effective tool. The resulting optical image classifications are aiding stakeholders in conservation and restoration, and as well as salmon habitat management, policy decisions. But most of this work has been carried out through manual imagery interpretation and digitization. And that occurs when an expert reviews aerial imagery and then digitizes habitat features on screen. And this approach can be extremely time consuming, cost inefficient, and inconsistent, especially if it's carried out on large scale, such as Puget Sound. And I know from my personal experience, because I've done a lot of this work. So therefore, I think an automated remote sensing approach is better suited and could be more cost efficient as well as consistent for assessment of pocket estuary habitat. So there's several approaches that could be utilized in automated remote sensing. So a traditional pixel-oriented approach utilizes classification of pixels, but there's some caveats to this method. It doesn't include any contextual information regarding the neighboring pixels. Also, this approach suffers often from salt and pepper effect, which is caused by really high heterogeneity between neighboring pixels, especially in really high resolution imagery. Therefore, an object-based approach is better suited for these types of analyses because the classification is applied to objects that are formed by grouping pixels based on their spectral similarity. And what's great about this approach is that you're able to utilize a fusion of various data sets such as LiDAR along with optical imagery. And also it is possible to utilize contextual information regarding neighboring objects. So for my study area, I selected 10 pocket estuaries within Whidbey Basin. And the reason why I selected these pocket estuaries is due to the fact that Skagit River System Cooperative, a local stakeholder, has been doing quite a bit of work in that location, and they have assessed the habitat using manual image interpretation there, and they graciously shared their protocols and their data that I can use as a reference. So my project goal was to evaluate the potential of the geographic object-based image analysis coupled with rule-based classification to improve the consistency and efficiency of pocket estuary habitat mapping. I had 4 main objectives. First one is to evaluate the availability and suitability of the remotely sensed data within the study area, prepare the acquired data for the analysis, perform the analysis using the hierarchical rule-based system, and then evaluate the resulting classification accuracy. So for my habitat classification scheme, I utilized a common framework that was developed by several stakeholders in the region. And in general, the pocket estuary is split into 2 zones, which is the backshore zone or areas higher than 3 meters in elevation, and then areas that are lower than 3 meters in elevation. And that's an intertidal zone, and that's really the zone that is accessible to salmon. But as you can see, there are multiple classes that include wood, several vegetation classes, a built class that sort of captures all of the human, modifications, and then also channels and also impoundments, which are just a standing kind of water here. So my project workflow included 4 major steps, which was data acquisition, data preprocessing, which included rigorous variable computation and selection based on the data, and then data processing, which was based on iterative multi-scale segmentation of the data sets, and then threshold-based classification based on variables. Finally, accuracy assessment was the last step, where I utilized accuracy assessment points and computed a confusion matrix. So I acquired publicly available NAPE orthophotography, which was collected in 2019 for my imagery. It's offered in 4 bands with 60 centimeter resolution. And then also I used the newest available LiDAR for the locations that I'd chosen, one collected from 2014 and another from 2017. I also utilized the Skagit River System Cooperative pocket estuary extents in order to collect my data. In my variable selection, I spent a lot of time here. I've derived multiple derivatives from optical imagery, which include band indices such as NDVI and NDWI, visible brightness. And from LiDAR, I derived a digital elevation model, normalized digital surface model, which represents heights of the objects, and then also topographic slope. I've also utilized several geometric variables, which pertain to the objects, textural object variables, and then finally, most importantly, contextual object variables. So I utilized eCognition software where I created a rule set, and I essentially split my rule set into 3 stages. The first stage was to classify the location into the zones, which you can see here. The orange and the red are all a backshore zone, and then blue is the intertidal zone, or the zone that is accessible to salmon. The next stage was to classify the backshore, and you can see classifying it, and this is just a simple example. A lot of these pocket estuaries were really complex. And then finally, I classified the intertidal zone, where there are more classes here. So for my accuracy assessment, I essentially created 50 accuracy assessment points for each class. I then utilized manual imagery interpretation to classify these points, and then compared the classification from the this automated approach to the classification from manual imagery interpretation. And then I created a confusion matrix with producers, users, and overall accuracy, as well as kappa coefficient. So here are the results from this analysis. Overall accuracy was 84%. Producers' accuracy ranged from 65% to 98%, while users' accuracy ranged from 66% to 98%. And the kappa coefficient was 0.82, indicating a pretty good agreement between classification and reference data. So here's some conclusions that I've gotten from this project, which will help make a decision whether this this approach can be scaled to the Puget Sound region. So first, I found that there are several data limitations. First being the temporal difference between optical imagery and LiDAR. This caused a lot of misclassifications in multiple areas, where some features have since been removed. I've also found that in some location, tidal stage was just too high and I wasn't able to extract channel. I also found that for some of the features, the 60 centimeters is just too coarse to extract them. Another challenge was shadows. They have very similar spectral signature to water, so I had some trouble with their misclassification. And I think in order, if this project were to proceed to the regional scale, manual adjustments would definitely be necessary. So in terms of cost effectiveness, I think that this approach certainly improves the classification consistency, but I found that there were multiple unique refinements that were necessary in several locations due to the fact that there was just some difference in image brightness and also some of the context as well. So I think that this pattern would likely to extend throughout Puget Sound, which would then make it less cost effective because a lot more time would need to be spent on these issues. So I think in general, in order for this approach to be scaled to the Puget Sound region, the complexity definitely has to be reduced. And I think focusing on just the intertidal zone, or the zone below 3 meters that is accessible to salmon, and perhaps also increasing the resolution of imagery and getting imagery that's like 30 centimeters or less, I think that would be most beneficial. And with that, I'd like to thank my advisor, Jarlath O'Neill Dunn, for his guidance throughout the project, and I can take any of your questions now.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. That was a very interesting presentation. While we wait for a question to show up, I have a question for you. In archaeology, I know that they've used this object-based recognition concept as of recent. Part of that method has been the incorporation of spatial autocorrelation measures as a way to sort of reinforce the accuracy assessment. I don't know, have you come across that at all in your literature search?
I have not.
Okay. I didn't know if that has sort of permeated into the other fields aside from archaeology or not.
Yeah, well, I guess the habitat classes by themselves, I mean, due to the nature of the pocket estuaries, I think that they're all gonna autocorrelate it between each other. And I was able to utilize a lot of the context to sort of build the rule set in that way.
Right. So that more or less mitigates the usefulness of the spatial autocorrelation measures.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
So I have a question here from Anthony Robinson. What do you think are the potential policy implications of work like this to understand salmon habitat in the future? Well, I think that this kind of work is really useful. And I mean, my team and NOAA, we spent tremendous amount of time producing these types of data sets for like large river estuaries and like freshwater habitats. And this really kind of helped all of the a lot of local stakeholders make decisions on where restoration action should take place, or, which sort of is really fantastic because, as you know, the funding is often limited for this type of work.
All right, well, thanks again for your great presentation, very insightful. Next up, we have Adam
Thank you.
Clark. Adam, if you can start your screen here pretty soon. I would like to remind folks that at 8 o'clock, you can switch over to the other Zoom room where we have two presenters for their 596A peer review. All right, Adam, we see your presentation, so take it away.
Okay, everybody, can you hear me? I apologize.
Yes.
All righty. Good evening. This is Adam Clark, and I'm presenting my Geography 596 Bravo MGIS capstone project. It is titled Center Pivot Irrigation Feature Extraction in the Chesapeake Bay Watershed using an object-based image analysis approach. The Chesapeake Bay Watershed has a tremendous amount of agricultural irrigation throughout, and in particular, the United States Department of Agriculture National Agricultural Statistics Service indicates that the total acres irrigated in the United States in 2013 were just over 55 million, and in 2018 we're just below 56 million, so a tremendous increase. In the Chesapeake Bay watershed, the states that are incorporated within that are the states of New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and Delaware. The data sets used for this project, excuse me, the prior work done for this type of center pivot irrigation feature extraction utilized primarily traditional pixel-based methods, manual interpretation, and the usage of convolutional neural networks. And the manual interpretation and digitization process, quite often is going to be a time-consuming and just overall resource-intensive process. The usage of convolutional neural networks and the work and the literature reviews that I've kind of came across really incorporated the primary basis of that was the usage of the traditional pixel-based methods. And I found that the usage of elevation data was omitted primarily because of this lack of availability. Secondarily is because the available LiDAR-derived elevation data was at a finer resolution than oftentimes the coarse resolution satellite imagery, such as Sentinel-2 and such, regardless of the 10 meter panchromatic or the 15 meter multispectral. Oftentimes the processes used were kind of downsampled and downsized for efficiency. I found that very much so kind of downplaying the overall access and utility of the data and purpose of the actual extraction itself. So this presentation in my work centered on the usage of object-based image analysis, primarily the, specifically the Trimble's eCognition OBIA software. The data used for this were the with the 2013 USDA National Agricultural Imagery Program data. Was a 4-band NAEP product, 1 meter ground sample distance, as well as a 2013 Hurricane Sandy 1 meter quality level 2 LiDAR data. And both of these data sets were graciously provided to me from the University of Vermont Spatial Analysis Laboratory. And so that really allowed me to focus on rule set development rather than data prep, which was a significant advantage in this process. What you're seeing here is a 4-band NAEP off to the left. In the central portion of the screen, you are seeing the 1 meter digital elevation model, and off to the right, you're seeing a 1 meter digital surface model. In this image here, we're looking at what exactly a center pivot irrigation system is. The center pivot irrigation system is an infrastructure that is hinged on one end of the actual infrastructure. Obviously, we're seeing wheels. We're seeing kind of an A-frame with the wheels attached, and that is all supporting the actual irrigation arm, which is carrying the water and hoses and such. Overall, there's a significant amount of visible irrigation, center pivot irrigation, CPI, throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And in this particular project, I am utilizing, as I have stated prior, which was the 1 meter ground sample distance 4-band NAEP for the state of Delaware, as well as the same 1 meter GSD LiDAR data, both DEM and a DSM, also for the state of Delaware. In Delaware specifically, the USGS did a manual interpretation and digitization project. This project here that I'm doing did not compare the 2 data sets. My hope is that later on it would, but in this state in the game, it is just simply trying to find an automated approach to center pivot feature extraction. This particular screenshot here is indicating off to the left, we're visibly what wheel tracks look like, associated access lanes going to the center pivot irrigation systems. That's not always a guarantee, but that is often found. And off to the lower right, you see irrigation arm. So in this case, with this multispectral imagery, the irrigation arm is very much apparent. So are the wheel tracks. And the center pivot tower and well pump is something that is present, but oftentimes I found it very difficult to visually interpret that as well as extract. In this particular screenshot, we're looking at an overall workflow. Now this is significantly scaled down. I have my input data. I've got using Trimble's eCognition object-based image analysis software. And I'm creating algorithms, a rule set to effectively segment, identify, extract, and classify individuals and groups of image objects across the study area. And then I'm classifying those image objects, and I've used a variety of temporary classes, such as water, structures, trees, agricultural fields, and center pivot irrigation systems. However, at the end of the rule set, very much thorough rule set, I only utilized, for simplicity, noise removal, as well as the center pivot irrigation system signatures. And these are all will be used in for the Chesapeake Bay watershed for enhanced informed decision making for planners and policymakers, and that could be used for anything from natural resource management, protection, and mitigation. My study area, as I mentioned, is the state of Delaware. Excuse me, my study area is located within the state of Delaware. Off to the left, that image we see off to the southwest corner of the state of Delaware. You see my study area. Off to the right is a kind of a zoomed in view of that study area. Initially, we see numerous different types of spectral values. We're seeing a variety of greens, browns, and kind of some tans. So we've got quite a variety of growing stages within this peak growing season, which the foreign ape has captured. In this particular example, this is a starting point, a zoomed in point where I will start where I started the center pivot irrigation signatures extraction. And below is just a simple normalized digital surface model, which is a height above ground of all features. The initial stage in this segmentation, I wanted to really leverage large image objects to better get rid of elevated objects above 1.5, or excuse me, 0.5 meters, so approximately 1.5 feet. I used the large image objects because that allowed me the opportunity to roll through quickly and get a good representation, which is large enough to accomplish the goal, but fine enough to not incorporate too many land cover classes within that image object. And down below is just a simple as I'm rolling through it, that's what I've classified as blue, just which will carry on throughout this of my elevated objects, so elevated non-CPI objects, if you will. This is a second step here. I utilize even larger image objects so I can leverage the ability to segment out and discriminate roads. Those are problematic both from visible brightness as well as their NDVI values. Excuse me, their near infrared values. And this next portion of this is using smaller image objects so that I could discriminate water and shadows. So items that are that have low near infrared values, and oftentimes are on the outskirts of some of these elevated objects. The next step in the segmentation, and we'll see this throughout the presentation, is that I started out large and then I'm kind of building small. That type of approach seemed to be the best representation for myself. I'm utilizing smaller objects here in my multi-resolution segmentation, which really does a great job of discriminating between homogeneous and heterogeneous image objects. I also leveraged in this classification process, I used a lot of border to, so relative border to image objects. So really leveraging the spectral values of each image object, its shape, extent, compactness, and texture values relative to its surroundings. And so, and if I utilize the relative border to quite a bit. So example would be that if I had a water, a shadow object, and it had a relative border to a tree canopy or an elevated non-CPI, and it had a near infrared value that was extremely low, then I classified that as water or shadow. And I kind of just rolled through this process and kind of kept building out this data set. As I did this through each smaller segmentation, I included a new potential CPI 3 class or 4 or 5. And later on, I also then started removing noise, items that I knew that were not center pivot irrigation signatures, as well as just kind of overall building this out. In this particular shot here, I chose to create a noise removal class, and this is one of the final classes there. And I kept using a lot of my relation to neighboring objects and really leveraged that heavily throughout the entire process, mainly because the spectral values throughout this data set were extremely difficult to work with. The inter and intra homogeneousness of the pixel values were very much apparent. In this particular shot, I've got some of the final classes of this center pivot irrigation feature extraction as it relates to wheel tracks. So as we see here, we have wheel tracks very much apparent in red. in a circular fashion. And off to the in that lower image, off to the eastern third of that, well, we actually see a center pivot irrigation, an irrigation arm overlapping with some of those wheel tracks, which is great to see. However, in the northwest corner of that lower image, we see a very bright, visibly bright field with various tillage patterns, which made it really difficult to extract. And I was getting a lot of false positives with that. This is an overall 14.5 kilometer study area. And off to the left is just a 4-band nape. Off to the right was going to be my very busy with 2 class extraction, my extracted classes out there, which was green was noise removal and red was CPI structures. Here's a zoomed in portion of that, very much cleaned up. These are side-by-side images, and the noise removal process was very difficult due to the spectral value similarities throughout, but I felt that the overall process for extracting these wheel tracks was pretty successful. Here's what the noise removed, and just simply the wheel tracks and the rest of the CPI infrastructure. Problematic areas in this case were going to be the again, some of the visibly bright and very much homogeneous fields, various tillage patterns. You can see that in the central central field and off to the northeast corner, the upper right. Various types of growth throughout this growing season, and various inter and intra fields were problematic. Here's another shot of that. Off to the right, we see quite a bit of spectral variance within those fields. We had a lot of browns, tans, lights, and very brights, and so that often wreaked havoc throughout this data set. This is the study area again. I'll quickly roll through. I'm watching my time, and it looks like we've got our irrigation arm feature extraction here. Again, just started out large to remove elevated features. I am then kind of slowly using smaller scaled image objects, so making smaller image objects. What I found incredibly difficult with this is the LiDAR capture did not get a complete coverage. This is not a Geiger mode capture. This is a QL level 2, approximately 0.7 point density. 0.7 meters point density. So I did not get a complete capture on that complete irrigation arm. So going back to that irrigation picture, you know, some of this, some of the hits I got for the elevation, it very much did was some part of that supporting infrastructure. I received some hits that were approximately 1 meter off the ground up to 3 to 4 meters, and so I really got the full spectrum of you know, support diagonal structures of that CPI arm and the wheels, and so therefore it was very sporadic, and so I had to use a region growth or a pixel growth, which initially kind of just builds off my initial hit of elevated center pivot irrigation feature center pivot irrigation arms, and kind of grew that out. So I had the ability to actually get some meaningful objects. And so throughout this process, I increased the size of that and performed a lot of region grows and did quite a bit of merging of my image objects, which takes smaller objects and merges them into larger image objects. And so what we're seeing here in the purple and that fuchsia color, that's the potential irrigation arms that I extracted. Green would be noise removal, and light blue is going to be the elevated non-CPI. Just like the prior extraction, I went ahead and I kept building upon this, and we have a darker purple color now as I've kind of parsed through and used a lot of relative border to a lot of the features within the image objects, and really leverage each image object's values and features relative to itself and other image objects. The final classes I have is going to be the noise removal and irrigation arm. So irrigation arm would be the darker color, and the noise removal in this particular shot. This is the full study area. Off to the left is my classification with overlaid on top of the 4 nape, and off to the right is my classification overlaid over top of the NDSM. As we can see, the actual the length to width ratios were utilized as well, and as you can see, the overall any lengthy items, we get really good success on capturing that information, which is really great. Here's a zoomed in shot of that as well. Some problem areas here. Again, I mentioned that the LiDAR capture did not do a full complete capture of these center pivot irrigation systems. The lower screen is the results of the NDSM. And so that is the reason why I had to take those individual pixels and grow those towards items or pixels more like themselves, and kind of continue to grow that out. As you can see as well, is that in that nape imagery above, there's only one irrigation arm that is present, whereas my extraction also in that nape, and as well as the actual extraction, or excuse me, the NDSM below has 2 different arms. And so my thought with this is that this particular area, as with others, was in the like a side lap or a forward lap of the LiDAR swath. And so on one traverse of that transect, it was in one location, and this is a kind of a living, breathing thing, CPI, or powered hydraulically and electrically. And so when it came back through and captured that in the overlap, my hypothesis is that it was in a different location. Here's another shot of that. In this particular shot here, looking at the CPI infrastructure irrigation arms adjacent to tree lines wreaked a lot of havoc. As you can see in that lower left of the upper screen there, I have a visible CPI system that is properly classified as an irrigation arm, and then the front third of that is actually classified as a noise removal, and that is due to the process I used to classify it and further segment this out. I found that tree lines that have an elevation comparable to irrigation arms, the elevation, I found that very problematic throughout. In this case, another example of an irrigation like a false positive here due to a tree line or a windbreak. My overall my accuracy report here, this was generated by creating an creating accuracy assessment points, visually interpreting what I see from my reference imagery related to the CPI infrastructure extraction. I used the reference imagery of the 4-band nape and had an overall accuracy of 48.5% approximately. The producer's accuracy is not the greatest out there. Is about the 45 to 50%, and the user's accuracy as it relates to irrigation arms is not attractive at all. As it relates to the CPI infrastructure, the signatures, we're talking wheel tracks and such. The producer's accuracy was 77%, and which is not the greatest either. And the user's accuracy is quite frankly, it's not exactly what I anticipated. This was an incredibly difficult process to undertake due to the spectral similarities, the homogeneousness of those values. There is not this is not being done out there, so this was a kind of a new frontier, which was really great for me to be part of. I would like to thank my advisor, Jonathan Yildoon, for providing his expertise throughout the way. That was very much appreciative having that in my tackle box. And with that, I apologize for taking longer, and I will take and field any questions.
Okay, thanks, Adam, for your presentation. Do you have any questions that pop up? One question that I had as reading through this, how would you have to modify your approach to the center pivot irrigations that exist, say, in Kansas or Nebraska?
Yeah. You know, I going over this process, I really found that I had better luck utilizing the LiDAR-derived surface models, in particular with that NDSM. I found it very much easier, a lot easier to extract the irrigation arms than I did extracting wheel tracks. Oftentimes with the wheel tracks, it was very much, they would just kind of just disappear. So you'd have a very good image object that you're working with and building with smaller image objects, and then it would just kind of fall off, and you just lose that. Field boundaries played a vital role in that as well. I got a lot of false positives. So I think really moving beyond this, I would leverage that the NDSM, regardless of where I'm at, and how to specifically do that would be just with a knowledge of knowing what is a QL level 2 product that you're creating surface models from. What are your limitations, and really diving into the intricacies of that input data so you can better exploit that. I would kind of repeat the process, to be honest with you, and I think starting large and getting rid of your very much anything beyond the 15 foot in elevation, getting rid of that, and I think really just kind of I went through numerous different models of rule sets, and I think that would be a good one to kind of go with, is just stick with the NDSM and start large, grab reliable image objects, and just kind of parse through the rest of those image objects and use your relationships, and really kind of diving into those elements of interpretation.
All right, thanks. There's one more question for you in the chat window.
All right. Looks like it's a very interesting and complete work. OBIA is likely the wave of the future, but it's thought to only be the advanced students since it's difficult to implement given the concepts and tools. What are your thoughts? You know, my only exposure to this was my coursework in Geography 883 with my advisor, Jonathan Neal Dune. And I very much think that there is a bright future for this. And this thing just hit the streets, to the best of my knowledge, very early 2000s, and there seems to be, in looking a lot of my literature review out there seems to be quite a bit of uptick, especially with recent publications utilizing this technology. But I think we're kind of, it's a blend of the old and the new. There's not a lot of utilization in this particular extraction type of process, utilizing the software, utilizing elevation models as well, and incorporating that. Also, I think it definitely is a wave, but data availability, and that's also a limitation out there. We're very fortunate here in the United States, where we have access to, at minimum, at this stage in the game, with the USDA NAEP imagery. Originally, when the program started, looking at around a 2 meter GSD, and then eventually moving towards a 1 meter, and now we're at a 40 to 60 meter. And oftentimes the temporal resolution, we're looking at around a 2-year return time. And so I think that's a great opportunity, and there's lots of data out there, and I think it's also fueling this this surge of the software and the techniques. I think we'll be there as well. Definitely not the subject matter expert. There's other folks out there. My advisor knows quite a bit more than I do, and could probably definitely put me in my place. But from what I understand and what I've gathered, there's a large influx of the technology out there, and definitely it does take a different kind of thinking to function within this type of software. The software itself has hundreds of algorithms out there. For me to exploit each and every one of them and find the best recipe for this extraction was definitely a bit far-fetched, although I was up to the task. I found that diving into understanding what it is you want to accomplish, understanding your data inputs and their limitations, and really diving into your elements of image interpretation, especially with like associations and such, and taking that in the mind and then putting that into an algorithm. And so I think that takes a certain individual to run that as well. Are there any other questions out there?
Great job, Adam. Fritz actually moved over to the other Zoom room. So sorry that we're kind of straddling two rooms here, but thanks everybody for joining this room. And if anybody's willing to go over, there's just 2 presentations left for this evening. The Zoom link is in the email that I sent earlier today. We're trying to keep the 596A and 596B Zoom room separate and the recording separate. So thanks to all presenters and participants, and please head over there if you can.
Bravo, graduates.